My name is Ryan, and for most of my life I believed I had everything a man could want. A stable job, a beautiful home, and a loving wife named Emily. We met when we were both in our early 20s, back when life was full of endless possibilities and the world felt like it was ours to conquer. Emily was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. Smart, funny, and incredibly beautiful. I still remember the first time I saw her at that college party, standing by the bar, her laughter ringing out above the music. It was one of those moments you see in movies, where everything seems to slow down, and just know, that this person is going to be someone special. We dated for a few years before I finally worked up the courage to propose. It was a simple proposal, no flash mobs or elaborate plans. Just me, on one knee, in the middle of a quiet park where we had our first date. When she said yes, I felt like the luckiest man alive. We married the following year, a modest ceremony with close friends and family. Life after that was everything I had hoped for. We were partners in every sense of the word, planning our future, traveling, and eventually buying our first home together. For 10 years, I believed we were happy. We weren't perfect, no couple is. But we were good together. Or so I thought. Looking back now, I realized there were signs, little things that I chose to ignore or simply didn't see. Emily had always been a social butterfly, much more so than I was. She loved to go out, attend parties, and meet new people, while I was more of a homebody, content with a quiet night in or a weekend spent working on my car. At first, I admired this about her. She had this way of lighting up a room, of drawing people in with her charm and easygoing nature. It was one of the things that had attracted me to her in the first place. But as the years went by, that light that had once drawn me in began to feel like a shadow creeping over our marriage. Emily would go out more frequently, often without me. At first it was just the occasional girls' night out, but over time, these outings became more frequent, more elaborate. I found myself spending more and more evenings alone, sitting on the couch, staring at the clock, waiting for her to come home. I'd text her, and she'd reply with a quick, "Having fun, be home late," and that would be that. I didn't want to be the jealous husband, so I let it slide. I trusted her. She was my wife, after all. But trust, as I would soon learn, can be a double-edged sword. The first real crack in our marriage came about a year ago when Emily started a new job at a marketing firm downtown. She was excited about the position, more money, more responsibility, and a chance to work with some big-name clients. I was happy for her, proud even. She deserved the success. But with the new job came late nights at the office, business trips, and an ever-growing distance between us. We still talked, still shared our days with each other. But something was different. It was like there was this invisible wall between us, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break through. One night, after one of her many late nights at the office, she came home around midnight, the smell of alcohol and expensive perfume clinging to her clothes. I was half asleep on the couch when she walked in, her hair disheveled and her makeup slightly smudged. She looked surprised to see me awake. "You're still up?" she asked, her voice slightly slurred. "I couldn't sleep," I replied, trying to keep the concern out of my voice. "Rough night?" She shrugged, kicking off her heels and sinking into the couch next to me. "Just work stuff, you know how it is." I nodded, but something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that something was off. "Do you want to talk about it?" I offered, hoping she would open up to me. She shook her head, leaning over to give me a quick kiss on the cheek. "No, it's fine. I'm just tired. I think I'm going to head to bed." And with that, she stood up, leaving me alone on the couch once again. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty space where she had been, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. That night marked the beginning of the end, though I didn't realize it at the time. The late nights became more frequent, the distance between us growing wider with each passing day. Emily became more secretive, keeping her phone close, locking it with a password she never had before. I'd catch her texting late at night, a small smile playing on her lips as she typed away. When I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd just say it was work-related or one of her girlfriends. But deep down, I knew. I think I always knew. The truth has a way of revealing itself no matter how hard you try to ignore it. And when the truth finally came out, It hit me like a freight train, shattering the life I thought I had built. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my life around, was not the person I thought she was. The foundation of my marriage, the trust that I had so blindly placed in her, was nothing more than a crumbling facade, hiding the betrayal that lay beneath. It all came crashing down one cold November evening when I found out the truth about my wife. The air was thick with tension that cold November night, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes your skin prickle with unease. I had been on edge for weeks, the gnawing suspicion that something was terribly wrong growing stronger with each passing day. Emily had become a ghost in our home, slipping in and out of our life together like a shadow, always there, yet somehow distant, unreachable. That evening she had come home late again, her usual excuse of work running late, barely audible as she made her way to the bedroom without so much as a glance in my direction. I watched her go, feeling the familiar pang of doubt twist in my gut. But I didn't say anything. What could I say? Every time I had tried to talk to her about the distance between us, she had brushed me off, blaming work or stress or some other convenient excuse. But tonight I wasn't going to let it slide. After a few minutes of sitting alone in the living room, I heard the faint buzz of Emily's phone, which she had carelessly left on the kitchen counter. She never left her phone lying around anymore, and my heart started pounding as I stared at it. I knew it wasn't right to invade her privacy, but at that moment, the need to know the truth overpowered any sense of guilt or hesitation. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead as I crossed the room and picked up her phone. The screen lit up, and there it was, a message from someone named Zack. My hand trembled as I unlocked her phone, my fingers moving of their own accord as I navigated to her messages. The conversation was like a punch to the gut, each word cutting deeper than the last. There were no work-related texts, no innocent banter between friends, just pure, unfiltered desire. Zack was no colleague or platonic friend. He was her lover. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the messages, the explicit nature of their exchanges leaving no room for doubt. "I can't wait to see you again," Zack had written. "Last night was amazing. I still can't get the taste of you out of my mouth." I felt sick. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. I kept reading, even though every fiber of my being was screaming at me to stop, to throw the phone across the room and pretend I hadn't seen any of it. But I couldn't stop. I had to know the full extent of her betrayal. "I'll be thinking about you when I'm with him," Emily had replied, and I nearly doubled over, a sharp pain shooting through my chest. There were more messages, each one worse than the last. They talked about the nights they spent together, the things they did, the way she moaned his name while she was supposed to be at work. There were pictures, too. Nude shots of Emily that she had sent him, and some of him that she had saved, smiling like a fucking schoolgirl in love, my Emily, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. I stumbled back, dropping the phone on the counter as if it had burned me. My heart was racing, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The room felt like it was spinning, and I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, a dull roar drowning out all rational thought. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But it was. The evidence was right there in front of me, undeniable and gut-wrenching. I don't know how long I stood there, staring blankly at the phone, my mind reeling from the shock. Eventually, the numbness gave way to something darker, something more primal. Rage. White-hot and all-consuming, it surged through me like a firestorm, obliterating any lingering doubts or hesitation. I wasn't just angry, I was fucking livid. The kind of anger that makes you see red, that makes your hands curl into fists and your vision blur with hatred. Zack. That fucking piece of shit. How dare he? How fucking dare he touch my wife, desecrate what was mine? I felt like a man possessed, the need for revenge coursing through my veins like venom. I didn't care about the consequences, didn't care about anything other than making that bastard pay for what he had done. Without thinking, I grabbed my car keys and stormed out of the house, not even bothering to grab a jacket as I headed out into the freezing night. I knew where Zack lived. Emily had mentioned him before, back when he was just a friend from work. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, my teeth clenched as I drove through the dark, deserted streets. His apartment complex wasn't far, just a few blocks away. The drive felt like it took forever, but in reality, it was probably only a few minutes. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak, But above all, a burning need to hurt him, to make him suffer like I was suffering. I pulled into the parking lot, the engine still running as I sat there for a moment, staring up at the building. It was late, and most of the lights were off, but I could see a faint glow coming from one of the windows on the second floor. That had to be his place. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the adrenaline surging through me as I turned off the car and got out. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't care. I was too far gone to feel anything other than the burning need for vengeance. My breath came out in short, frosty puffs as I made my way to the entrance, my footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. I didn't even hesitate as I climbed the stairs, my blood boiling with each step. When I reached his door, I didn't knock. I fucking kicked it in, the door slamming against the wall with a deafening crash. I stormed inside, and there he was, Zack, half naked and startled, his eyes wide with shock as he scrambled to his feet. "What the fuck, Ryan?" he stammered. But I didn't give him a chance to say anything more. I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw with a sickening thud that echoed through the small apartment. He went down hard, crashing into the coffee table as I stood over him, seething with rage. "You piece of shit!" I shouted, my voice raw with fury. "You think you can fuck my wife and get away with it?" He didn't answer, too busy trying to pick himself up off the floor. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I grabbed him by the collar, hauling him up and slamming him against the wall with all the strength I could muster. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" I spat, my face inches from his as I glared at him. "Did you think you could just fuck her and go on with your life like nothing happened?" "Ryan, please," he started. But I cut him off with another punch, this one aimed at his gut. He doubled over, gasping for air as he clutched his stomach, his eyes wide with fear. "You don't get to beg!" I snarled, my voice trembling with anger. "You don't get to say anything. You fucking ruined my life, and now I'm going to ruin yours." I lost track of how many times I hit him, each punch fueled by the overwhelming hatred that had taken hold of me. His face was a bloody mess, his nose broken, blood streaming from his mouth as he tried in vain to defend himself. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not until every last ounce of rage had been expelled. Not until he was nothing more than a broken, bleeding heap on the floor. By the time I finally stepped back, my chest was heaving, my knuckles bruised and bleeding from the force of my blows. Zack was barely conscious, slumped against the wall, his breathing ragged and labored. I stared down at him, my vision still hazy with anger. And for a brief moment, I considered finishing the job. It would be so easy. Just one more punch, one more kick, and I could end it all. But something stopped me. Some small, rational part of my brain that reminded me that this wasn't just about Zack. This was about Emily. She was the one who had betrayed me, who had shattered the life we had built together. And she was going to pay for it too. I turned and left Zack lying there, bleeding on his cheap carpet, not even bothering to look back as I made my way out of the apartment and down the stairs. My heart was still pounding, my breath coming in harsh gasps as I climbed into my car and sped off into the night, the taste of vengeance still bitter on my tongue. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. I needed time to think, to process everything that had just happened. I drove aimlessly through the city, the streets deserted, the cold night air whipping through the open window, as I tried to wrap my head around the reality of what my life had become. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a small, run-down bar on the edge of town. I didn't know why I had come here, but I didn't care. I needed a drink, something strong to numb the pain, to silence the voices in my head that were screaming at me, taunting me with the "I don't remember how long I sat in that bar, nursing a whiskey that tasted like it was poured straight from a bottle of rubbing alcohol." It didn't matter. I needed the burn, needed something to match the fire that was raging inside me. The events of the night kept replaying in my mind. The discovery of Emily's affair, the brutal encounter with Zack. The rage hadn't subsided, not even a little. If anything, it had grown stronger, festering inside me, feeding on the betrayal and humiliation I felt. By the time I finally left the bar, the whiskey doing nothing to dull the sharp edges of my fury, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine and go back to the life I once knew. I had to confront Emily, had to make her face the consequences of what she had done, and I wasn't going to be gentle about it. The drive home was a blur, my mind consumed by the thought of what awaited me. Emily would be there, in our bed, probably sleeping soundly, completely unaware of the storm that was about to crash down on her. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white as I pictured her face when I walked through the door, her startled expression when she saw the blood on my hands. She would know, without me having to say a word, that her world was about to come crashing down. I parked in the driveway, the cold night air stinging my face as I got out of the car and slammed the door shut. The house was dark, the only light coming from the small lamp in the living room window. I stood there for a moment, staring at the house that had once been my sanctuary, now just a prison filled with lies and deceit. Then, without another thought, I walked up to the front door, my footsteps heavy on the pavement. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the familiar sound echoing through the silent house. I stepped inside, the smell of Emily's perfume lingering in the air, a scent that once brought me comfort but now made my stomach turn. The house was eerily quiet, and for a moment, I wondered if she was even home. Maybe she had gone to Zack's place. Maybe she was lying in his bed right now, replaying their last encounter in her mind. The thought made my blood boil, and I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't bother to turn on the lights as I made my way through the living room and down the hallway to our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light spilling out from inside. I pushed the door open, and there she was. Emily, lying in our bed, her back turned to me, her hair spread out on the pillow like a halo. She was wearing one of my old t-shirts, the fabric clinging to her slender frame, and for a brief moment, I almost hesitated. But then I remembered the messages, the pictures, the way she had laughed with Zack, and all my doubts melted away. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the bed. The floor creaked under my weight, and Emily stirred, rolling over to face me. Her eyes were half closed, groggy with sleep, but they snapped open when she saw me standing there, my expression cold and unyielding. "Ryan," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "What are you doing up?" I didn't answer. I just stared at her, my jaw clenched so tightly that I could feel the tension radiating up into my temples. Emily sat up, blinking in confusion as she took in the sight of me. My disheveled appearance, the dried blood on my knuckles, the look of pure fury etched on my face. "Ryan, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling now, a hint of fear creeping into her eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, but it came out as a low growl. "I know, Emily." Her eyes widened, her face draining of color as she stared at me, trying to process what I had just said. "Know what?" "Don't fucking play dumb with me," I snapped, taking a step closer to the bed. "I know about Zack. I know everything." She recoiled as if I had struck her, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find the words. "Ryan, Shut up!" I hissed, cutting her off before she could spew out whatever pathetic excuse she had lined up. "I saw the messages, Emily. I saw the fucking pictures. How long has this been going on?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I fucking think," I shouted, my voice reverberating through the room. "You've been fucking him behind my back, lying to me, making me look like a goddamn fool." Emily flinched at the venom in my voice, her tears spilling over as she tried to reach out to me, her hand trembling. "Ryan, please, just let me explain." I swatted her hand away, disgusted by the mere thought of her touching me. "Explain? Explain what, Emily? How you could just throw away everything we built together for some cheap fucking thrill?" "It wasn't like that," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen, it just did." "Bullshit!" I roared, my anger boiling over as I grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. "You made a choice, Emily. You chose to betray me, to ruin our marriage, our life," she cried out, her body limp in my grasp as she sobbed uncontrollably. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I spat, pushing her away from me. "You're sorry? Sorry doesn't fucking cut it, Emily. Sorry doesn't undo what you did." She crumpled onto the bed, her face buried in the pillow as she sobbed, her cries muffled by the fabric. I stood over her, my chest heaving, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to rein in my fury. But the sight of her lying there, so pathetic, so weak, only fueled my anger further. "I want to know everything," I demanded, my voice cold and merciless. "How long has this been going on? How many times did you fuck him?" She shook her head, her voice choked with tears. "I don't know." "Don't fucking lie to me!" I shouted, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her upright. "Tell me the truth, or so help me, I'll make you regret it." She gasped, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at me, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. "It's been 6 months," she stammered, her voice barely audible. We started seeing each other after that business trip to Chicago." 6 months, I repeated, my voice dripping with contempt. 6 months of lies? 6 months of sneaking around behind my back? And what? You didn't think I'd find out? You didn't think I'd figure out that my wife was fucking some other guy?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whimpered, tears streaming down her face. It just happened, and I didn't know how to stop it." "You didn't know how to stop it?" I echoed, my voice rising with each word. "You could have stopped it at any time, Emily. You could have said no. You could have ended it, but you didn't. You kept going. You kept lying. You kept fucking him." She flinched, her body trembling as she sobbed, her tears soaking through the pillow. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that there was no way out of this, no excuse that could make up for what she had done. And it should have satisfied me. I should have felt some sense of vindication, some small measure of triumph at seeing her so broken, so defeated. But all I felt was a hollow, aching emptiness, a void where my love for her used to be. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head frantically, her eyes wide with desperation. No, I don't. Ryan, I love you. I've always loved you." "Don't," I said, my voice cold and flat. "Don't you fucking say that to me. Not after what you've done." "I made a mistake," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I know I did, but I swear, it didn't mean anything." "It didn't mean anything?" I repeated, incredulous. "You threw away our marriage, our life, for something that didn't mean anything?" She sobbed harder, her body shaking as she clutched at the bedsheets, her tears soaking through the fabric. "Please, Ryan, please don't leave me. I'll do anything. I'll make it right, I swear." "How?" I demanded, my voice harsh and unforgiving. "How are you going to make this right, Emily? How are you going to undo what you've done?" "I'll end it," she cried, her voice desperate. "I'll never see him again. I'll do whatever it takes." Emily's sobs echoed through the room, filling the space with the sound of her desperation, but I felt nothing but a cold, calculating fury. She could cry all she wanted, beg and plead until her voice gave out, but it wouldn't change what she had done. I had given her everything, my love, my trust, my life, and she had tossed it aside like it was worthless. No, there was no going back, no forgiveness. What she had done was unforgivable, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. "I'll do anything," she repeated, her voice trembling as she clutched at my arm. "Please, Ryan, just give me a chance to make it right." I looked down at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything, and felt a surge of disgust. "Anything?" I asked, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. She nodded frantically, her eyes wide with hope, as if she thought there was still a chance to salvage what she had destroyed. "Yes, anything. Just tell me what to do, and I'll do it." I stared at her for a long moment, the wheels in my mind turning as I considered my options. I could divorce her, leave her with nothing, and walk away from this mess with my head held high. But that felt too easy, too clean. Emily didn't deserve an easy way out. She deserved to suffer, to feel the same pain and humiliation that she had inflicted on me. And I was going to make sure she did. "All right," I said finally, my voice calm and measured. "You want to make it right? Fine. You'll do exactly what I say, when I say it, without question. Understand?" She nodded eagerly, relief flooding her tear-streaked face. Yes, I'll do whatever you want." I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "You're going to destroy every last shred of dignity you have left, Emily. You're going to humiliate yourself in ways you never thought possible, and you're going to do it with a smile on your face. And when I'm done with you, you're going to wish you had never met me." Her eyes widened in fear, the hope that had momentarily flickered in them snuffed out by the cold, hard truth of my words. But she didn't argue, didn't try to back out of the deal she had just made. She had no choice, and she knew it. What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I straightened up, my gaze never leaving hers as I laid out the first step of my plan. "First, you're going to tell me everything. Every detail of your affair with Zack. How many times you fucked him, where, when, everything." She flinched, the color draining from her face as she realized what I was asking, but she didn't argue. She knew she couldn't. With trembling hands, she wiped the tears from her face and began to speak. "It started 6 months ago," she said, her voice shaky and uncertain. "After the business trip to Chicago, we met at a bar after one of the meetings, and we started talking. He was charming, funny, and I don't know, I just felt drawn to him. We had a few drinks, and then one thing led to another, and we ended up in his hotel room." "Keep going," I demanded, my voice cold and unfeeling. She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with fresh tears as she continued. "After that, we started meeting up regularly. At first, it was just for drinks, but then it became more. We'd meet at his apartment, sometimes during the day, sometimes at night when I told you I was working late. We'd have sex, and then I'd go home like nothing happened." "How many times?" I asked, my voice tight with barely restrained anger. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe a dozen, maybe more. I lost count." "A dozen!" I repeated, my stomach twisting with revulsion. "You fucked him a dozen times, and then came home to me like it was nothing." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Ryan." "Save it," I snapped, cutting her off. "Sorry doesn't mean shit to me right now." She nodded, biting her lip to stifle a sob, her hands trembling as she clutched at the bedsheets. I watched her for a moment, letting the silence stretch between us, the weight of her confession hanging in the air like a noose around her neck. "Here's what's going to happen," I said finally, my voice calm and controlled. "You're going to delete his number, block him on every platform, and never contact him again. But that's just the beginning. You're also going to write him a letter detailing everything you told me tonight. How you used him, how he meant nothing to you, how you regret every single moment you spent with him. And then you're going to send it to him, along with a picture of the two of us, reminding him that you're my wife and that's all you'll ever be." Her eyes widened in horror, her breath catching in her throat. "Ryan, please, I can't." "You can, and you will," I said, my voice cold and unforgiving. "You said you'd do anything to make it right, and this is part of it. You're going to show him that he was nothing more than a distraction, a cheap thrill that you regret with every fiber of your being, and you're going to do it because I said so." She stared at me, her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She knew she couldn't. Slowly she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." "Good," I said, the satisfaction of my victory filling the empty void inside me. But I wasn't done with her yet. Not by a long shot. "Next," I continued, my tone sharp and unyielding. "You're going to call your parents. You're going to tell them what you did. How you betrayed your husband for a man who didn't give a damn about you. And you're going to do it while I listen." Her face paled, and she shook her head, her voice trembling with fear. "Ryan, no, please." "You don't get to say no," I snarled, my patience wearing thin. "You wanted to make it right? This is how you do it. You're going to own up to what you did, and you're going to let everyone know just how low you've sunk." She began to cry again, her sobs filling the room as she realized the full extent of the humiliation she was about to endure. But I didn't care. I had no sympathy left for her, no compassion. All I had was a burning desire to make her suffer, to make her feel the same pain and betrayal that she had inflicted on me. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone on the nightstand, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. I watched her every move, my heart pounding with anticipation as she finally found the number and pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, and then I heard the familiar voice of her mother on the other end. "Emily, is everything all right?" her mother asked, concern lacing her voice. Emily choked back a sob, her voice trembling as she spoke. Mom, I need to tell you something. What is it, sweetheart? Her mother replied, her tone soft and soothing. Emily glanced at me, her eyes pleading for mercy, but I gave her none. I've been unfaithful to Ryan, she admitted, her voice cracking with every word. I had an affair. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, and then her mother's voice, cold and disbelieving. What? Emily, what are you saying? I'm sorry, Mom. Emily sobbed, her shoulders shaking as she held the phone to her ear. I'm so sorry, I made a terrible mistake, and now I don't know what to do. Her mother's voice hardened, the shock giving way to anger. How could you, Emily? How could you do this to Ryan? What were you thinking? Emily's tears flowed freely now, her body trembling as she tried to hold herself together. I don't know, she cried, her voice breaking. I wasn't thinking. I don't know. I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know what to do. You'd better figure it out, her mother snapped, her voice harsh and unforgiving. Ryan deserves better than this, Emily. You've made your bed. Now you have to lie in it. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face as she listened to her mother's scathing words. I know, she whispered. I know I messed up. I just wanted you to know. There was another moment of silence, and then her mother spoke again, her tone cold and distant. I don't know what to say to you, Emily. I'm disappointed, ashamed. I can't believe you would do something like this. Emily's face crumpled, her sobs growing louder as her mother's words cut into her like a knife. I watched her with a detached sense of satisfaction. Emily's sobs faded into the background as I turned my attention to the next phase of my plan. What I had done to Zack earlier that night wasn't enough. Physical pain alone couldn't repay the debt he owed me. I wanted to dismantle his life, just as he had helped dismantle mine. He had to feel the sting of betrayal, the crushing weight of humiliation, and the bitter taste of loss. I waited until Emily hung up the phone, her tear-streaked face buried in her hands, before I moved to the corner of the room where I had tossed my coat. Inside the pocket was Zack's phone, the one I had taken from him during our earlier encounter. He had been too beaten and bloodied to resist when I pried it from his grasp, and now it was going to be the instrument of his ruin. I unlocked the phone, my fingers moving deftly over the screen as I navigated to his messages. I wasn't surprised to find that Emily wasn't the only woman Zack had been texting. There were dozens of conversations with various women, all laced with the same lewd promises and explicit photos that he had sent to my wife. Zack was nothing more than a common player, stringing along as many women as he could manage. But now, I was about to turn his world upside down. I started with the most recent messages, those that had been exchanged with Emily. I copied each one, forwarding them to every woman Zack had been involved with. Some of them were married, some single, but it didn't matter. By the time I was finished, every one of them would know exactly what kind of man Zack really was. As I pressed send on the last message, a cold satisfaction settled over me. But I wasn't done yet. I scrolled through Zack's contacts, searching for the one person who could make this whole situation explode in his face, his boss. Zack worked at the same marketing firm as Emily, which meant that their affair had likely crossed professional boundaries as well. I found his boss's number quickly, a man named Craig who, from what I knew, had little tolerance for workplace drama. Perfect. I composed a message, attaching several of the more damning texts between Zack and Emily. The message was simple, direct. Craig, I think you should be aware of this inappropriate relationship happening between two of your employees. It's been going on for months, affecting both their work and their personal lives. This kind of behavior reflects poorly on your company. Before I sent it, I made sure to include a few of the more explicit photos Zack had sent to Emily, the kind of pictures that would make any boss think twice about keeping someone like Zack on the payroll. With a final, steadying breath, I hit send. The effect would be immediate. By morning, Zack's career would be in tatters, his reputation destroyed. I could already imagine the look on his face when he received the news. Confusion, panic, followed by the dawning horror of realizing that his carefully constructed web of lies had come undone. I wanted him to know that this was no accident, that someone had meticulously and deliberately ruined him. And I wanted him to know that it was me. But there was still more to be done. I turned to Emily, who had been watching me with wide, fearful eyes as I sent the messages. She knew something was happening, but she didn't dare ask. Not yet. Not until I told her. I needed her to understand that this wasn't just about Zack. It was about her, too. "Get dressed," I ordered, my voice cold and commanding. "We're going out." She hesitated, her tear-streaked face full of confusion. "Where are we going?" I didn't answer her. I just stared at her until she got up from the bed, wiping her tears and pulling on a pair of jeans and a sweater. I watched her, my gaze hard and unyielding. She looked fragile, broken, but I wasn't done breaking her yet. When she was ready, I led her out of the house and into the car. The drive was silent, tense, Emily sitting stiffly in the passenger seat, glancing at me nervously every few minutes. She knew better than to ask where we were going, and the truth was, I wasn't sure myself. I just knew I needed to keep pushing, keep her on the edge until she fully understood the gravity of what she had done. It wasn't until we pulled up in front of Zack's apartment that she realized what was happening. Her eyes widened in fear, her hand reaching out to grab my arm. "Ryan, please, let's just go home. Please, don't do this." "Get out," I said, my voice as cold as the night air. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Please, Ryan, I'm begging you. Don't make me go in there." "Get out of the car, Emily," I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle, her movements slow and hesitant. I watched her struggle with the decision, the fear and shame written all over her face. But she knew she had no choice. She had agreed to do anything, and now she had to pay the price. I got out of the car, slamming the door behind me as I walked around to her side. She was still sitting there, frozen in place, her eyes wide with terror. I yanked the door open, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her out of the car. She stumbled, her knees buckling as she tried to keep up with my pace. I dragged her toward the entrance of Zack's building, my grip on her arm tight and unrelenting. "Ryan, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Please don't do this." I ignored her, pulling her inside and up the stairs to Zack's apartment. The door was still slightly ajar from when I had left earlier, and I kicked it open, shoving Emily inside. The sight that greeted us was almost pathetic. Zack was still slumped against the wall where I had left him, his face a swollen, bloody mess. He was barely conscious, his head lolling to one side as he tried to focus on the figure in the doorway. "Emily?" he croaked, his voice weak and slurred. "What's going on? What are you doing here?" I shoved her forward, forcing her to face the man she had betrayed me with. "Tell him, Emily," I ordered, my voice cold and unyielding. "Tell him what you told me." She turned to look at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Ryan, please. Tell him!" I shouted, my patience wearing thin. "Tell him how much he meant to you. Tell him how you used him, how you never loved him. Tell him everything." Her lip quivered, tears streaming down her face as she turned back to Zack. He stared at her, his face a twisted mask of pain and confusion. "Emily, what's going on?" She took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she began to speak. "Zack, I never loved you," she whispered, her voice cracking with every word. "You were just a distraction. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, but it did. And now it's over." He stared at her, disbelief and heartbreak flickering in his swollen eyes. "Emily, please." "It's over, Zack," she repeated, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, but I don't love you. I never did." I could see the realization dawn on Zack's face, the understanding that this wasn't just a breakup. It was a complete and utter betrayal. The man who had beaten him to a pulp had brought his lover here, forced her to confess that she had never cared for him, and made sure he understood that everything they had shared was nothing more than a lie. "Ryan," Zack croaked, his voice barely audible. "Please, don't do this." I stepped forward, grabbing Emily by the arm and pulling her back toward the door. "You're done," I said coldly. "Both of you. And if I ever see either of you again, I won't be so fucking merciful." Zack's face crumpled, a choked sob escaping his battered lips as I dragged Emily out of the apartment and down the stairs. She didn't resist this time, too broken, too humiliated to fight back. I shoved her into the car and drove away, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. The fury that had driven me all night was finally beginning to fade, leaving behind a hollow, empty feeling that I couldn't shake. I had done what I set out to do, destroyed Zack's life, humiliated Emily, and taken my revenge. But as I drove through the dark, empty streets, I couldn't help but wonder if any of it had been worth it. I pulled into our driveway, the engine idling as I sat there, staring at the house that had once been my home. Emily was sitting beside me, her face buried in her hands, her body trembling with silent sobs. I watched her for a long moment. The woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me. And I realized that no matter what I had done, no matter how much I had made her suffer, it would never be enough. The pain she had caused, the trust she had shattered, it was too deep, too raw. I could never forgive her, could never go back to the way things were. All I could do now was walk away, leaving the ruins of our life behind me. Without a word, I turned off the engine and got out of the car. I didn't wait for Emily, didn't look back as I walked toward the house. I could hear her footsteps behind me, hesitant and slow, but I didn't care. I opened the door, stepping inside without bothering to turn on the lights. The house was dark, silent, and empty, just like my heart. I stood there for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened crashing down on me all at once. And then I walked upstairs, leaving Emily behind as I went into the bedroom and closed the door, shutting out the world and the memories of what had once been. The morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, casting a dim, pale glow across the bedroom. I had barely slept, my mind a jumbled mess of anger, exhaustion, and something else, something emptier, darker. The events of the previous night felt surreal, like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I had spent the last hours in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what my life had become. But there was no sense to be made, no way to rationalize the betrayal, the violence, and the deep, gnawing emptiness that had settled in my chest. When I finally heard the faint sound of Emily stirring downstairs, I knew it was time. Time to end this once and for all. The house was eerily silent, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the final blow to fall. I pushed myself out of bed, my muscles stiff and aching, and made my way downstairs, my footsteps heavy on the creaking floorboards. Emily was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee clutched in her trembling hands. She looked like a ghost of the woman she once was, pale, exhausted, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She didn't even look up when I entered the room. She just sat there, staring blankly into her coffee, as if she were lost in some distant, unreachable place. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her, trying to remember the woman I had fallen in love with so many years ago. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. And the truth was, I didn't care anymore. The love I had once felt for her had been buried under layers of anger, betrayal, and a cold, unyielding need for revenge. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, the sound of the wooden legs scraping against the floor startling her out of her daze. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resignation. We both knew what was coming. "Ryan," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, can we just—" "No," I interrupted, my tone flat and emotionless. "We can't just pretend this didn't happen, Emily. We can't go back to the way things were. It's over." Her lip quivered, fresh tears welling up in her eyes. "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But please, can we at least talk about it? I can't stand the silence, the distance. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but—" "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through her words like a knife. "Just stop." She fell silent, her shoulders slumping as she stared down at the table, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the roiling emotions that were churning inside me. I had to stay in control, had to keep my composure, even though all I wanted to do was scream at her, lash out, make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had caused me. "There's nothing left to say," I said finally, my voice cold and detached. "You made your choices, Emily. You decided to throw everything away for what? A cheap thrill? A fling with a man who didn't give a damn about you?" She winced at my words, but she didn't argue. She knew better. "I was wrong," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I know that now. I know I betrayed you, and I'm so sorry, Ryan. I'll never forgive myself for what I did. But please, if there's any chance—" "There isn't," I interrupted, my tone harsh and unforgiving. "You don't get to ask for forgiveness. Not after what you did. You don't get to ask for anything." She bit her lip, trying to hold back her sobs, but they spilled out anyway, her body shaking with the force of her grief. I watched her cry, but I felt nothing. Just a cold, empty numbness that had taken root deep inside me. I loved you, I said, my voice low and strained. I gave you everything, Emily, and you threw it all away. You betrayed me. You betrayed us. And now there's nothing left. Her sobs grew louder, her tears streaming down her face as she tried to reach out to me, her hand trembling as it hovered in the air between us. Ryan, please, she begged, her voice cracking. Please don't leave me. I know I don't deserve it, but I love you. I need you. I recoiled from her touch, the sight of her pleading, tear-streaked face filling me with a bitter, twisted satisfaction. This was what I wanted, what I needed. To see her broken. To see her suffer as I had suffered. But now that it was happening, all I felt was a deep, hollow emptiness. I don't care, I said, my voice cold and unyielding. I don't care if you love me. I don't care if you need me. I don't care about you at all, Emily. Not anymore. She flinched as if I had struck her, her hand dropping limply to her side. What are you saying? She asked, her voice trembling. I'm saying that it's over, I replied, my words deliberate, final. I'm filing for divorce. Her face crumpled, her sobs turning into a wail of despair. No, she moaned, shaking her head. No, please, Ryan, don't do this. We can fix this. We can work through it. Work through it? I scoffed, my voice laced with bitterness. There's nothing to work through, Emily. You destroyed everything. You ruined us. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face as she tried to reach for me again. Please, Ryan. I'll do anything to make it right. Just don't leave me, please. I stared at her, the woman who had once been my whole world, and felt nothing but a cold, cruel satisfaction. This was the end. This was what I had wanted. To break her. To make her feel the same pain, the same despair that she had inflicted on me. And now that it was done, I realized that it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. I'm done, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. You're on your own now, Emily. Her eyes widened in horror, her sobs growing louder as she tried to process what I was saying. What? What do you mean? I'm leaving, I replied, standing up from the table. I'll be out of the house by the end of the week. I'll have the divorce papers sent over as soon as they're ready. No! She screamed, her voice raw with desperation. Please, Ryan, don't do this. Please, I'll do anything. Anything? I repeated, my voice cold and mocking. You've already done enough, Emily. You've done more than enough. She collapsed onto the table, her body racked with sobs, her hands clutching at the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. I watched her for a moment, the woman I had once loved, now reduced to a broken, sobbing mess, and I felt nothing. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her behind, her cries echoing through the house as I made my way upstairs. The sound of her sobs followed me, a haunting reminder of the life I was leaving behind. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. I entered the bedroom, the room we had once shared, the bed where we had once slept together, and started packing my things. I moved mechanically, methodically, gathering up the remnants of my life, the life that Emily had destroyed with her betrayal. I didn't think about what I was doing, didn't let myself feel anything. I just packed, each item going into the suitcase like it was just another piece of the puzzle that had fallen apart. When I was finished, I looked around the room one last time, the room that had once been filled with so much love, so much hope, and now stood as a testament to everything that had been lost. I closed the suitcase, the sound of the zipper harsh in the quiet of the room, and walked out, leaving behind the memories, the pain, and the woman who had torn my life apart. Emily was still in the kitchen, her sobs quieting to soft, pitiful whimpers as I walked past her and out the front door. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. The door closed behind me with a final, resounding click, and I stepped out into the cold, crisp morning air. I stood there for a moment, the suitcase in my hand, the weight of the past pressing down on me like a leaden shroud. But as I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs, I felt something shift inside me, something that had been buried beneath the anger, the betrayal, and the pain. It was freedom. The freedom to walk away, to leave the wreckage of my life behind, and to start anew. The freedom to reclaim my life, to rebuild, to find happiness again, on my own terms. I took a step forward, then another, the suitcase heavy in my hand, but my heart lighter than it had been in months. I didn't know where I was going, didn't have a plan, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was that I was free, free from the lies, the deceit, and the pain. And as I walked down the driveway, the sun just beginning to rise on the horizon, I knew that this was the beginning of something new, something better, and I was ready for it. I drove aimlessly for hours, the miles passing by in a blur of gray asphalt and overcast skies. The early morning light gradually brightened, but it did nothing to lift the gloom that hung over me. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to be far away from that house, far away from Emily and the wreckage of our marriage. The events of the past few days played on a loop in my mind, discovering her affair, the confrontation, the brutal revenge on Zack, and finally, leaving her behind in tears. Part of me felt like I had won some sort of twisted game, exacting my revenge and taking control of a situation that had spun so wildly out of my grasp. But the victory was hollow, the satisfaction fleeting. What had I really achieved? I had destroyed a marriage, shattered my own life, and left behind a woman who, despite everything, had once meant the world to me. The anger that had driven me for so long was beginning to dissipate, leaving behind an emptiness that I didn't know how to fill. Eventually, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where people go to disappear, even if just for a little while. I checked in with the bored-looking receptionist, who barely glanced up from her magazine as she handed me the key to room 23. I thanked her, though she didn't seem to notice, and made my way down the dimly lit hallway to my room. The room was as unremarkable as the rest of the motel. A single bed with a lumpy mattress, a dresser with a few scratches and dents, and a small TV mounted on the wall that looked like it hadn't been turned on in years. But it was quiet, and it was mine, at least for now. I tossed my suitcase on the bed and sat down heavily, the reality of my situation finally beginning to sink in. I was alone. Truly, completely alone. I had no home, no wife, no real sense of direction. I had left everything behind, driven by anger and a need for revenge, and now that it was over, I had nothing left. I had burned my life to the ground, and now I was left sifting through the ashes, trying to figure out what came next. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the faded wallpaper, the silence pressing in on me like a physical weight. I wanted to feel something, regret, anger, relief, but all I felt was numb. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out, half expecting another angry message from Emily. But it was just a notification from my lawyer, Marcia, confirming our appointment later that week to discuss the divorce. Divorce. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like it belonged to someone else's life, not mine. I had never imagined that I would end up here in a dingy motel room with my marriage in ruins and my future uncertain. But this was my reality now, and I had to deal with it. I sighed, running a hand through my hair as I tried to think clearly. I needed to get my life back on track, needed to figure out what I was going to do next. The first step I knew was finalizing the divorce. As much as it hurt, as much as I hated the idea of officially ending my marriage, there was no other option. Emily and I were beyond repair, and staying married to her would only prolong the pain and make it harder for both of us to move on. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Marcia's number. She had been a steady presence through all of this, guiding me through the legal process with a calm professionalism that I had come to rely on. I hit the call button, and after a few rings she picked up. "Ryan," she greeted me, her voice warm but businesslike. "I'm glad you called. How are you holding up?" I let out a bitter laugh. "I've been better, Marcia. I'm ready to move forward with the divorce. Whatever it takes. I just want to get this over with." "I understand," she replied, her tone sympathetic. "We'll need to go over a few things in our meeting, but I'll make sure everything is handled as smoothly as possible. You'll have to provide a statement about the reasons for the divorce, which will be part of the court filings, but given the circumstances, it should be a straightforward process." "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing my temples as a headache began to form. "I'll do whatever I need to." "Good," she said, her voice firm. "The sooner we get this finalized, the sooner you can start rebuilding your life." Rebuilding my life. The phrase sounded like a cliché, but it was the truth. My life as I had known it was over, and now I had to pick up the pieces and figure out how to start again. It was daunting, terrifying even, but I didn't have a choice. "Thanks, Marcia," I said, trying to keep the weariness out of my voice. "I'll see you later this week." "Take care of yourself, Ryan," she replied. "We'll get through this." We ended the call, and I sat back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "We'll get through this," she had said, but who was she kidding? I was the one who had to get through this, and I didn't even know where to start. I knew I couldn't stay in the motel forever, wallowing in self-pity and nursing my wounds. I had to take action, had to find a way to move forward. But how? Everything I had known, everything I had built with Emily was gone. My life felt like a shipwreck, and I was the sole survivor, clinging to a piece of debris in a vast, empty ocean. The first step, I decided, was finding a more permanent place to stay. The motel was a temporary refuge, but I needed something more stable, more comfortable. A place where I could begin to rebuild, to figure out who I was now that everything had changed. I pulled out my laptop and began searching for apartments, trying to focus on the practicalities of finding a new home instead of the emotional turmoil that threatened to overwhelm me. I spent the next few hours scrolling through listings, contacting landlords, and setting up viewings. It felt strangely therapeutic, like I was taking control of something, even if it was just the simple act of finding a place to live. By the time I was done, I had a list of potential apartments and a few appointments lined up for the next day. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the day wore on, I found myself thinking more and more about what I wanted my life to look like now that I was on my own. For so long, my identity had been tied to my marriage, to my role as Emily's husband. But now, I had to figure out who I was without her, what I wanted from life now that the future we had planned together was no longer an option. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be days when the loneliness would be unbearable, when the memories of what I had lost would threaten to pull me under. But I couldn't let myself drown in the past. I had to keep moving forward, one step at a time, even if those steps were small and uncertain. The following day, I visited several apartments, each one offering a different vision of what my new life could be. Some were too small, others too expensive. But eventually, I found a place that felt right. A modest one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, far enough from the memories of my old life but close enough to my work and the places I knew. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and that was all I needed right now. I signed the lease, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness as I handed over the first month's rent. This was it, the beginning of my new life, the first step in moving on from everything that had happened. As I walked out of the leasing office, the keys to my new apartment jingling in my pocket, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was small, fragile, and easily extinguished. But it was there, a tiny flame that I could nurture and grow. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to rebuild, to create something new out of the ashes of my old life. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew there would be setbacks, but I was determined to try. Over the next few days, I began the process of moving into my new apartment. It was a slow, painful process, sorting through the remnants of my life with Emily, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. Every item I packed or discarded felt like a small act of closure, a step toward leaving the past behind and embracing the future. I spent hours setting up my new place, trying to make it feel like home. It was strange, living alone for the first time in years. But there was also a sense of freedom that came with it, a sense that this space was mine, and mine alone, a blank canvas where I could start over, free from the weight of the past. As the days turned into weeks, I slowly began to adjust to my new reality. I went to work, saw my lawyer, and finalized the divorce. Emily and I exchanged a few terse emails about dividing our assets, but we didn't speak in person again. There was nothing left to say. We were both too broken, too hurt, to ever repair what had been shattered, and as painful as it was, I knew it was for the best. The finality of the divorce brought a strange sense of relief. It was over. The marriage, the pain, the betrayal, all of it was behind me now. The paperwork was signed, the assets divided, and we were officially no longer husband and wife. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but at the same time, it was a chance to finally move on, to close that chapter of my life and start writing a new one. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I threw myself into my work, took up new hobbies, and reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with over the years. It wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness was overwhelming, when the memories of Emily and the life we had shared haunted me, but I was determined to keep moving forward. Therapy became a crucial part of my healing process. I found a therapist who helped me work through the pain, the anger, and the confusion that had been festering inside me for so long. Each session was like peeling back a layer of the emotional armor I had built around myself, exposing the raw wounds underneath. It was painful, but it was also necessary. I needed to confront the hurt, the betrayal, and the loss if I was ever going to move past it. And slowly, ever so slowly, I began to heal. The wounds didn't disappear overnight, and there were still days when the pain felt fresh and new, but I was learning to live with it, to accept it as part of my story. The scars would always be there, a reminder of what I had been through, but they didn't have to define me. They didn't have to be the end of my story. As the months passed, I found myself growing stronger, more resilient. The anger that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a quiet acceptance of what had happened. I didn't forgive Emily, not completely, but I no longer let my hatred for her rule my life. She was a part of my past, a part of my story, but she didn't have to be a part of my future. And as I stood in my new apartment, looking out at the city below, I realized that I had finally found a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't complete, but it was enough to let me move forward, to start living my life again, enough to let me hope for a future that, despite everything, was still full of possibilities. 6 months had passed since I walked out of that house, leaving behind the shattered pieces of my old life. Those months had been a journey, grueling at times, but also transformative. I had clawed my way out of the wreckage, and while the pain and betrayal still lingered in the background, like a scar that would never fully fade, I was learning to live again. My new apartment had become more than just a place to stay. It had become a sanctuary, a symbol of my independence and resilience. I had taken my time to make it mine, decorating it with things that reflected who I was. Not who I had been as part of a couple, but who I was as an individual. The walls were lined with art that I had chosen. The furniture was arranged in a way that suited my needs, and the space was filled with the quiet hum of solitude that I had come to appreciate. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was peace. I had reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with during my marriage. They had welcomed me back into their lives without question, offering support without prying into the details of my past. We spent time together, catching up over beers, watching games, or just shooting the breeze. It was simple, uncomplicated, and exactly what I needed. My work had also become a focus of my energy. I threw myself into projects, taking on new challenges and responsibilities that I had once shied away from. It was as if the destruction of my marriage had unleashed a drive in me that I hadn't known existed. My colleagues noticed the change, and my boss even mentioned how much more engaged I seemed. I didn't tell them about the personal hell I had gone through, but the results spoke for themselves. I was promoted to a senior position, something I hadn't even been aiming for, but it felt like a validation of my efforts to rebuild my life. Therapy remained a constant in my routine. My therapist, Dr. Ellis, had been a lifeline through the darkest moments, guiding me through the complexities of grief, anger, and ultimately, acceptance. Our sessions had become a place where I could unravel the tangled mess of emotions that had built up over years of denial and heartbreak. With his help, I had learned to forgive myself for the things I couldn't change, and to accept that some wounds would never fully heal, and that was okay. One of the most surprising developments during those 6 months was the rediscovery of my passions. Before I met Emily, I had been an avid hiker, spending weekends exploring trails and losing myself in the beauty of nature. It was something I had let go of over the years, too consumed by the demands of work and the emotional drain of a failing marriage. But now, I found myself drawn back to the mountains, to the sense of freedom that came with each step up a rugged path. Hiking became a form of therapy in itself, a way to reconnect with the person I had been before everything fell apart. It was on one of these hikes that I met someone new. Her name was Elisa, and we crossed paths on a particularly challenging trail in the mountains. She was vibrant, full of energy, and completely in love with the outdoors. We started talking as we navigated the rocky terrain, and before long, it felt like we had known each other for years. There was an ease to our conversation, a simplicity that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Over the next few weeks, we started hiking together regularly. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people enjoying each other's company and the beauty of the world around them. Alyssa had a way of making me laugh, of pulling me out of my head and into the present moment. With her, I didn't feel the weight of the past dragging me down. It was just us, the trail, and the vast open sky. I wasn't looking for a relationship. God knows I wasn't ready for that. But being with Alyssa felt like a step in the right direction. She knew about my past, about Emily and everything that had happened. But she didn't treat me like I was damaged or broken. She treated me like a person, someone who was still worthy of kindness and happiness, despite everything. One evening after a long hike that had left us both exhausted but exhilarated, we sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley below. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the landscape, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. "Ryan," Alyssa said, her voice soft but steady, "I know you've been through a lot. I can't imagine what it's like to go through something like that. But I want you to know that I'm here, however you need me to be. No expectations, no pressure, just here." I turned to look at her, surprised by the sincerity in her eyes. "Thank you," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm grateful to have met you." She smiled, a smile that reached her eyes and warmed something deep inside me. Me too. As we sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that this was what moving on looked like. Not forgetting the past, but finding a way to live with it and still find joy in the present. It wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending it hadn't happened. It was about acknowledging it, accepting it, and choosing to keep going anyway. My life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. The scars of what had happened would always be there, a reminder of the love I had lost and the person I had been. But those scars didn't define me. They were just a part of my story, a story that was still being written, one day at a time. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. My new routine became a comfort, a steady rhythm that kept me grounded. I spent my weekdays at work, pushing myself to excel in my new role, and my weekends exploring new trails with Alyssa. Our friendship deepened, and while there were moments when I felt the stirrings of something more, we both knew that rushing into anything would only complicate things. For now, we were content with what we had: companionship, laughter, and a shared love of the outdoors. As the anniversary of my divorce approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey I had been on. The man I was a year ago felt like a stranger, someone who had been so consumed by anger and pain that he couldn't see a way out. But that man had changed, had grown. I had learned to let go, to forgive. Not just Emily, but myself. I had learned to embrace the uncertainty of the future, to find beauty in the simple things, and to trust that, no matter what, I would be okay. On the day that marked 1 year since I had walked out of that house for the last time, I decided to do something different. I took the day off work, packed a small bag, and drove to the mountains. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Alyssa. This was something I needed to do alone. I found a trail I hadn't explored before, a steep, winding path that led to a secluded overlook. The hike was challenging, but that was the point. With each step, I felt like I was shedding another layer of the past, leaving behind the bitterness, the regret, and the pain. By the time I reached the top, I was breathless, my muscles aching, but it was a good pain, a cleansing pain. I sat down on a large rock, the valley spreading out below me in a patchwork of greens and browns. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of closure. The man who had climbed this mountain was not the same man who had descended into the depths of despair a year ago. I had been through hell and back, but I had come out stronger, more resilient, and ready to face whatever the future held. As I sat there watching the clouds drift lazily across the sky, I thought about Emily. I wondered where she was, what she was doing, whether she had found peace in her own way. There was no anger left, no resentment, just a quiet acceptance that we had both made mistakes, that we had both suffered, and that we had both survived. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't hate Zack, or even myself. The fire of revenge had burned out long ago, leaving only the ashes of a life that I had once known. But from those ashes, something new had emerged, something stronger, something better. I had rebuilt my life, not as the man I used to be, but as the man I had become. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew that I was ready for it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the strength and resilience I had found within myself. I stood up, taking one last look at the view, before turning to make my way back down the mountain. The path was still steep, still challenging, but I wasn't afraid. I knew now that I could handle whatever came my way. The man who descended this mountain was not defined by his past, but by his future. A future that was full of possibilities. And as I walked, the sun warm on my face, the breeze gentle in my hair, I realized that I was no longer just surviving. I was living, and it felt damn good.